Racist woman humiliated the black waitress. Then her billionaire husband was silently entering the room, watching everything unfold. Maya Brooks adjusted the crisp white apron around her waist and ran her fingers along the edge of a polished table, straightening the silverware one last time. The crescent room was quiet, the kind of still that made every footstep echo against the marble floors. Her reflection in the restaurant's mirrored wall caught her eye. Tired brown eyes under carefully applied makeup, full lips pressed into a neutral line, and skin that glimmered faintly under the soft amber lights. This was her stage, her arena, and yet she often felt invisible, her presence only as valuable as the efficiency of her service. She inhaled the mingling scents of roasted meat, fresh bread, and the subtle tang of fine wine. Every shift, she reminded herself, she had to carry grace in her steps, a calm precision that masked the nervous energy coiled beneath her ribs. She had learned that the world rarely offered acknowledgement without effort, and recognition often came only when she endured more than her patience could normally bear. The front doors swung open, letting in a gust of cold air and the sharp scent of expensive perfume. Victoria Langford entered first, her heels clicking against the marble, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her posture erect like she was carrying the weight of entitlement itself. Two friends followed, equally polished, eyes scanning the room with casual judgment. Maya straightened, readying her practiced smile, forcing her pulse to slow as they approached. "Good evening, ladies. Table for 3, she asked, her voice even calm, hiding the tension coiling in her chest. Victoria's gaze swept over Maya's uniform and name tag, lingering a fraction too long. "Oh, good," she said lightly, a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "They hired someone who looks capable of handling things, I guess." Her friends giggled softly, delicate and cruel at once. Maya felt her jaw tighten imperceptibly. The words were subtle but sharp, carrying a weight she knew all too well. She nodded politely, maintaining her composure. She led them through the restaurant, heels echoing softly on the marble. Each step was calculated, careful, measured to preserve the dignity Victoria sought to undermine. The faint sound of silverware clinking and low conversation surrounded her, but all she could hear was the hammering of her own heartbeat. She felt every glance from diners and staff alike, some curious, some uncomfortable, some silently judging. Victoria made small talk, her tone casual yet loaded. "Atlanta has really changed, hasn't it? Everywhere you go now, it's so different." She smiled at her friends, a smirk laced with superiority. Maya's mind flinched, interpreting the subtle implication that she, Maya, belonged to a class beneath them. She swallowed, forcing her shoulders to remain steady, repeating silently, "Grace is strength wearing heels." The table was set, soft amber light glinting off polished silver. Maya set down menus with careful precision, careful not to jostle the crystal glasses. Victoria leaned back in her chair, eyes scanning the room with a faint, contemptuous amusement. "Do you even eat here yourself?" she asked lightly, almost rhetorical, yet every word dripped with condescension. Her friends laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. Maya's pulse quickened, but her voice remained even. "I do my best to ensure every guest has a perfect experience." Victoria snorted, a small noise, dismissive. "Perfect? That's ambitious." She leaned slightly forward, her gaze sharp, assessing, predatory. "We'll see if you can keep up all night." The words were soft but lethal, slicing through the calm facade Maya worked so hard to maintain. She nodded politely, swallowing down the lump of anger rising in her throat. As she moved toward the kitchen to place their orders, Maya caught sight of a man at the entrance. Tall, well-dressed, standing apart from the commotion, he scanned the room with quiet authority. There was something in the way he observed her that pricked at her awareness, a subtle acknowledgement, a recognition she couldn't yet name. Her pulse shifted, a flicker of curiosity amid the anxiety. Back at the table, Victoria whispered a jab to her friends, a soft, cruel comment intended to be missed by no one. Maya's stomach clenched, but she forced her hands to remain steady, her movements precise as she poured water into their glasses. She felt the invisible weight of eyes upon her, every patron and staff member unwitting witnesses to the tension Victoria orchestrated. For Maya, this was familiar territory. Every shift carried potential for humiliation. Every smile from a guest could hide a knife of judgment. Yet she endured, walking the line between grace and suppressed fury, reminding herself that tonight's trials, like every other, were temporary, her strength permanent. She set down the last glass and took a silent breath, aware of the storm of scrutiny still swirling around her. Victoria's gaze followed her, calculating and sharp. Maya sensed the night was only beginning, that every interaction would be a test of patience, composure, and endurance. And somewhere beyond the threshold of expectation and cruelty, she felt the faintest hint of a shift, a presence that would soon tilt the balance in ways she could not yet imagine. The restaurant had grown busier, the low hum of conversation blending with the soft clatter of cutlery and the occasional pop of a cork. Maya moved through it like a tightrope walker, each step precise, each gesture measured, yet every nerve stretched taut under Victoria's scrutiny. Victoria's eyes never left her, sharp and calculating, assessing every movement as though it were a test Maya was destined to fail. "Excuse me, can you make sure this is absolutely perfect?" Victoria said, her voice carrying lightly across the table but sharp enough to pierce Maya's chest. Her friends laughed, delicate and mocking. "I'd hate to have an experience spoiled because of poor service." Each word was carefully chosen, a thinly veiled declaration of superiority. Maya's hands tightened around the tray she carried, her pulse thundering in her ears. She inhaled slowly, forcing her shoulders down, steadying the tremor threatening her hands. She had endured moments like this countless times before, but the weight never diminished. Every insult, every condescension, was a reminder of the unspoken hierarchy she was forced to navigate. As she reached the table with the ordered dishes, her foot caught slightly on the edge of a rug. A droplet of red wine leapt from the tray, landing on the pristine white of Victoria's designer blouse. The gasp was sharp, a jagged sound that cut through the low buzz of conversation. Victoria recoiled as if burned, hands flailing for effect. "Oh my God!" Victoria shrieked, the tone theatrical, a performance designed to humiliate. "Do they even train you properly?" She gestured to her friends, her voice rising in pitch and volume. Patrons glanced over, some curious, some sympathetic, and some smirking at the spectacle. Maya felt the familiar burn of shame climb her neck, chest tightening with a weight of unwanted attention. Maya bent gracefully to dab at the spill, her voice calm but low. "I'm so sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am." Her words carried the precise tone of professionalism, yet beneath them simmered years of resentment, hurt, and anger she could not yet voice. Victoria leaned forward, eyes glinting with cruelty. "No, say it properly. I expect an apology that reflects competence, not your usual mediocrity." The words were daggers disguised in civility. Maya's hands froze for a heartbeat before she composed herself, taking a deep breath to maintain control. Every diner now seemed attuned to the confrontation, the restaurant holding its collective breath. The soft murmur of conversations had faded into an almost oppressive silence, punctuated only by Victoria's pointed laughter. Maya's chest felt tight, the humiliation pressing like a physical weight, but she refused to shrink. She straightened, her back a line of controlled defiance. Tina, another server, leaned close, whispering, "She's escalating. Be careful." Maya shook her head ever so slightly, her focus unbroken. She had learned the importance of maintaining calm. The world rarely rewarded overt defiance, especially for someone like her. She needed patience, composure, and a subtle strength that could withstand ridicule without collapsing. Victoria's taunts continued, veiled but sharp. I wonder if someone like you even understands what quality service means, she said, tilting her wine glass, watching Maya carefully as though she were a specimen under scrutiny. Her friends giggled, nudging each other, eyes darting toward Maya with that familiar mix of curiosity and judgment. Maya's stomach churned with the old familiar ache, the sting of prejudice layered over the sting of performance pressure. She recalled past shifts, past encounters with guests who assumed her inferiority, and the years of subtle, accumulating weight that came with being underestimated, misjudged, and ignored. Yet she reminded herself that dignity could not be stripped by words alone. She bent to pick up a dropped napkin, taking care to avoid making any more mistakes, every motion deliberate. The room seemed to close in, the whispers of diners echoing like a chorus of judgment. She felt a ripple of fear, tinged with the faint thrill of knowing that she was walking the knife edge between public embarrassment and professional endurance. As she straightened, she caught movement in the entrance. A tall figure paused, quiet and deliberate, surveying the restaurant with an authority that made her stomach flutter. There was something in the way he looked at her, an almost imperceptible acknowledgement that set her heart racing with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. For a moment, Maya allowed herself the thought that perhaps the night would not end in humiliation alone. Victoria continued her performance, sharp and cruel, unaware that the balance of power in the room was subtly shifting. Every eye in the restaurant seemed drawn into the tension, watching the drama unfold, sensing the imminent change that Maya herself could not yet fully name. Maya exhaled slowly, steadying herself against the storm of judgment. She would endure. She would maintain her composure. And somewhere, beyond the immediate humiliation, she sensed the approaching presence that might tilt the night's trajectory, a shift from powerlessness to recognition, from cruelty to justice. The restaurant seemed to pause for a heartbeat when the doors opened again, letting in a figure who carried an undeniable presence. Richard Langford, tall and impeccably dressed, stepped inside with calm authority, as though the hum of the Crescent Room bent around him. He scanned the tables with a quiet, assessing gaze, and when his eyes fell on Maya, something flickered, recognition, memory, and unspoken respect all at once. Victoria's voice immediately brightened with expectation. "Richard, perfect timing," she said, laughter light but edged with control. "You simply have to see the service tonight. It's interesting." She gestured at Maya, the accusation sharp and deliberate, drawing the attention of nearby diners. Richard's gaze, however, went past the theatrical display and settled firmly on Maya. "Maya Brooks, right?" he asked, voice calm, but carrying a weight that silenced the room. Maya froze for a fraction of a second, shock mingling with disbelief. She nodded slowly, unsure if she should speak first. "You helped me at the charity gala 2 years ago," Richard continued, his tone neutral but firm. "I remember, because you were the only one who didn't judge the chaos. You kept everything from falling apart. I never forgot that." The memory he spoke of was vivid in Maya's mind. A night of relentless stress, flustered guests, and her own careful maneuvering to prevent disaster. And here he was, recognizing it, validating her effort in front of Victoria and everyone watching. Victoria's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. "You know her?" she asked, disbelief coating each word. The performative confidence she had wielded all evening began to crumble, replaced by a flicker of fear she could not mask. Richard's expression softened slightly as he looked back at Maya. "Yes, she was exceptional," he said. His acknowledgement was quiet but impossible to ignore. The diners who had been whispering now shifted in their seats, sensing a change in the energy of the room. Maya felt it too, a subtle lift in the weight pressing against her chest. Victoria, flustered, waved a hand toward him. "But she's just a waitress here tonight. Surely you." Richard interrupted gently but decisively. "I'm not here to discuss her job title. I'm here to recognize competence, dignity, and grace, qualities she has shown repeatedly, even when faced with unfair treatment." His eyes returned to Maya, steady and unwavering. You've done nothing but maintain your composure, even when provoked. Maya's heart hammered in her chest, a mixture of relief, validation, and the lingering ache of humiliation she had endured. She swallowed, the words she had rehearsed for self-defense unnecessary now. Recognition alone felt like justice, subtle yet undeniable. Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Her friends exchanged uneasy glances, their previous amusement replaced with discomfort. The balance in the room had shifted, and everyone sensed it. Maya had been underestimated, judged for her role, for her race, for the invisible barriers she had to navigate daily, and now the scales had begun to tip. Richard's attention returned to Victoria, calm yet firm. "The behavior you've shown is unacceptable," he said evenly. "Humiliating someone publicly, mocking their position, is not a joke. It reflects poorly on you, not on her." The room felt heavier with his words, a quiet moral gravity that made the earlier laughter fade into the tense hum of awareness. Maya stood taller, feeling the subtle surge of vindication and empowerment, though she did not gloat. She had endured, as she always had, and now the acknowledgement from someone of influence, someone whose judgment carried weight, made the humiliation of the past hours begin to dissolve. Her dignity remained intact, unbroken by cruelty. Victoria's eyes flickered with panic, a sharp contrast to the composure she had wielded like a weapon all evening. She opened her mouth again, perhaps to argue, perhaps to regain control, but Richard's steady presence held her in check. His calm authority amplified the contrast. Maya, graceful and unshaken. Victoria, faltering and exposed. Maya's hands, once trembling with tension, now rested at her sides, steady and firm. She drew a slow, quiet breath, feeling her pulse slow just enough to notice the room around her, the diners, the staff, the subtle ripple of acknowledgement that her endurance had earned. She did not need to speak, for the room already recognized the truth she had carried silently for years. Richard's gaze softened for a final moment. "You don't deserve any of this," he said to Maya, his words carrying both compassion and authority. "And everyone here can see it too." The diners shifted in their seats, murmuring quietly, the whispers spreading like a gentle wave. Victoria's dominance had evaporated, her carefully maintained superiority undone by recognition, truth, and the unshakable grace of the woman she had sought to humiliate. For Maya, this was more than a reprieve. It was a turning point. Years of microaggressions, subtle bias, and silent erasure had brought her to this exact moment, where acknowledgement met endurance, and cruelty met its match. And as she caught Richard's reassuring nod, she realized that the next chapter of the evening, the confrontation, the reckoning, was imminent. The restaurant seemed to contract around Victoria as Richard's words settled in the air. For the first time that evening, her carefully constructed confidence faltered, leaving a visible tremor beneath the surface of her elegance. Patrons shifted in their seats, the low murmur of conversation now carrying an edge of curiosity and anticipation. Every eye felt drawn to the unfolding reckoning, and Victoria sensed it, a subtle panic threading through her perfectly styled demeanor. Richard stepped closer, his gaze steady and unwavering, and addressed her directly. "Victoria, you've humiliated her for your amusement tonight. You assumed superiority because of wealth, status, and social power. That stops now." His voice was calm, but every word struck with undeniable authority. The patrons leaned in subtly, sensing the moral weight of the moment, the invisible scales of justice tipping. Victoria's hands shook slightly as she gripped the table, her manicured fingers pressing into the linen. "Richard, you're embarrassing me," she whispered, her voice tight, almost brittle. The public nature of the confrontation made her unease impossible to hide. "No," Richard replied, quiet but firm. "You embarrassed yourself. And you try to humiliate a woman who has done nothing but carry herself with dignity tonight. Look at her. Do you see her composure? That's strength you've never possessed." His words were measured, deliberate, cutting away the veils of entitlement she had cloaked herself in. Maya felt a flutter of something she hadn't allowed herself before. Quiet vindication, a deep-seated relief that recognition had finally arrived, not as pity, but as truth. Her chest tightened, not from fear, but from the surge of acknowledgement that she had longed for, the acknowledgement that validated years of silent endurance. She did not speak, allowing the silence to amplify the weight of Richard's words, letting Victoria feel the gravity of her actions. Victoria's friends shifted uneasily in their chairs, sensing the unspoken consequence of cruelty that had been on display. They had been accomplices in amusement, but the moral shift in the room was undeniable. Richard's calm authority had rewritten the dynamic entirely. Maya, once under scrutiny, now radiated quiet dominance. Victoria, once in control, now faltered under the undeniable truth. Maya's eyes remained steady, focused, and unflinching. She drew in a slow breath, letting the collective tension of the restaurant settle into a hum beneath her calm. Her inner monologue reflected years of microaggressions endured silently, the sting of casual prejudice, and the countless moments when dignity had been her only weapon. I endured, and now it matters, she thought, a faint swell of pride echoing in her chest. Victoria's voice cracked, almost a whisper. I didn't mean, but the words were hollow, carrying no conviction. Richard shook his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. Intent does not erase impact. Your words, your actions, have consequences. The patrons had grown quiet, the suspense palpable. Glasses glimmered in the dim light, silverware shimmered, and the faint music in the background seemed to pause, giving space for the moral reckoning unfolding. Victoria's carefully cultivated image of control was dissolving, thread by thread, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Maya's mind cataloged the moment with precision. She had learned long ago that endurance, composure, and grace often spoke louder than confrontation. And now, in this very room, those qualities had shifted the balance of power entirely. She allowed herself the subtle satisfaction of knowing that cruelty, when wielded without consequence, finally met its reckoning. Richard's voice carried again, this time softer, but no less potent. Victoria, you owe her respect. Not only as a worker, but as a human being. Acknowledge that, and take responsibility for your actions. Victoria's shoulders sagged slightly. The trembling of her hands intensified. She glanced at her friends, their expressions betraying embarrassment and unease. The performance of superiority she had relied upon for years had collapsed in the quiet authority of truth. Finally, with a voice barely audible, she muttered, "I'm sorry." Her eyes met Maya's, and for the first time, there was recognition, not of Maya's service, but of Maya's humanity and dignity, long overlooked and undervalued. Maya's chest swelled with a quiet, restrained triumph. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Instead, she allowed a soft exhale, a release of tension accumulated over countless hours of microaggression and humiliation. The room seemed to breathe with her, the patrons now witnesses to a reversal of power that had been long overdue. Richard's hand brushed briefly against her shoulder, a subtle acknowledgement of her composure and resilience. "You've carried yourself with unmatched grace," he murmured. Maya's eyes flicked to him for a moment, the silent gratitude clear, then returned to Victoria, who still seemed stunned by the shift in authority. The whispers of diners resumed, softer now, less mocking and more reverent, as if the room had collectively learned a lesson about dignity, respect, and the quiet power of endurance. Victoria sank slightly into her chair, humbled, a figure diminished not by force, but by the undeniable truth of someone she had sought to belittle. Maya straightened her shoulders, a quiet command of presence that filled the space. She had survived, she had endured, and tonight, in the soft, amber glow of the crescent room, justice had arrived in its most elegant and precise form. Unspoken, undeniable, and deeply felt. The morning sunlight spilled across Maya's small apartment, cutting through the blinds and golden streaks that danced on the hardwood floor. She moved slowly, savoring the quiet after the storm of the previous evening, the city beyond her window alive with its usual pulse. The events at the Crescent Room had left ripples in her chest, a mixture of relief, lingering tension, and a quiet, unshakable pride. Maya placed a vase of fresh flowers on the kitchen table, their fragrance sharp and sweet, filling the room with a sense of calm she hadn't known she would feel again. The humiliation of Victoria's cruelty, the laughter and whispered judgment from patrons, had been replaced by recognition, dignity, and the undeniable validation of her strength. She let herself inhale fully, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. News of the confrontation had spread quietly at first. Social media snippets, whispered conversations, and eventually headlines. Waitress stands tall in face of humiliation, and Atlanta millionaire intervenes to defend employee. Maya paid little attention to the attention itself. What mattered was the acknowledgement that she had survived, endured, and now commanded respect in a world that had often refused to see her worth. Within days, subtle changes emerged. The hotel quietly promoted her to event coordinator, recognizing her skill, composure, and professionalism. Guests who had previously dismissed her now greeted her with polite respect. Coworkers offered nods of quiet admiration, and she could feel a subtle shift in how she navigated the world, a sense that her labor, her dignity, and her presence were finally being seen. Victoria, in contrast, faced consequences both public and private. Social media dissected her behavior, friends distanced themselves, and the whispers of gossip painted her as a figure undone by her own arrogance. She had retreated to her apartment, staring at the same polished surfaces and designer decor that had once symbolized control, now reflecting the hollowness of entitlement and the weight of shame. The apology she had muttered the night before lingered unspoken, a reminder that some lessons come slowly, painfully. Richard Langford remained a quiet presence in Maya's life, subtle yet impactful. He supported her new venture, Grace Table events, funding small but meaningful projects, never intruding but always affirming. Maya did not see him as a savior. Rather, his recognition underscored the truth that her value had always existed, waiting only for acknowledgement. Months later, the Crescent Heights Hotel hosted a grand charity gala. Maya walked the familiar halls with a new authority, overseeing every table, coordinating every server, and managing the evening with a composed command that radiated quiet confidence. She was no longer just a figure of service. She was the architect of the event, every detail reflecting her skill and meticulous care. Patrons and staff deferred to her naturally, unaware that the same woman who had endured public humiliation now controlled the room with grace and precision. Victoria appeared quietly, understated, as if attempting to blend into the crowd. Gone were the flashy clothes and ostentatious jewelry, replaced by muted tones and tentative composure. She approached Maya cautiously, her eyes flickering with the memory of the previous night. "You built something beautiful," Victoria said softly, her voice fragile, almost unsure. The words carried no arrogance, only a tentative acknowledgement of Maya's endurance and competence. Maya turned, her gaze steady, measuring the sincerity in Victoria's voice. She did not smile, nor did she speak with triumph. "Out of what you broke," she said simply, letting the statement hang in the air, a truth acknowledged but not weaponized. Her tone was calm, measured, and dignified, the culmination of years of quiet endurance, now transformed into quiet authority. Victoria's lips trembled as she murmured, "Thank you for forgiving me." Maya's eyes softened, but she did not offer indulgence. "I didn't forgive you to make you feel better," she said, voice low but steady. "I did it to set myself free." There was no malice, no triumph in her words, only clarity, grace, and the subtle assertion of her own agency. She turned back to her team, giving instructions with an effortless authority that drew the room into her rhythm. Chandeliers sparkled above, reflecting on polished glass and silver, mirroring the light that now seemed to follow her every step. Her gaze swept across the room, taking in the tables, the guests, the staff, and she felt the quiet satisfaction of being fully recognized for her strength, skill, and dignity. The city outside pulsed with life, indifferent and unyielding, but inside the walls of the Crescent Heights, a quiet truth had been established. Power could shift, justice could be subtle yet undeniable, and dignity could remain intact even in the face of cruelty. Maya moved through the room, sunlight and chandelier light catching her dark skin, each step a testament to her resilience, endurance, and grace. She paused for a brief moment, inhaling the mingling scents of flowers, fine wine, and polished wood. The hum of conversation, once oppressive and judgmental, now felt alive with acknowledgement, respect, and subtle admiration. Maya smiled faintly to herself, a private, quiet smile that carried the weight of survival, triumph, and the reclamation of her dignity. For the first time in years, she felt unburdened. The humiliation, the microaggressions, the whispers of judgment, all had led to this moment. And as she surveyed the room, commanding the evening with calm authority, she understood that grace was not merely endurance, but a quiet, unshakable power. The night stretched before her, bright, full of possibility. And for Maya Brooks, the darkness of the past had finally given way to a light that no cruelty, no mockery, and no injustice could extinguish. She was seen. She was recognized. She was whole. Thank you for watching. You won't believe what happens next in these real-life stories of power and justice. Subscribe now and see how ordinary people turn humiliation into triumph.